everybody. Thank you for joining me as we begin our new series today on the things that Jesus never said. And today we're going to focus on, well, a statement we hear a lot that maybe some people think Jesus said, but he never did, and that is that you can do whatever you want to make you happy. And I'm joined with me today by three of my favoriteest kids in the whole world, Maddie, Clara, and Henry Iliff, right?
And
Thanks. Thanks for joining me, guys. All right. So I want to start off by asking you, what are some things that make you happy? You want to go first, Henry?
Jesus and God on a sunny day.
A sunny day, Jesus and God. Yeah, those are good ones. What do you think?
Gymnastics and spending time with my friends.
Gymnastics and time with your friends. How about you, Clara?
Making up stories and playing outside.
Yeah, making up stories, playing outside. Those are all good things to be happy about. But you know, Henry said something there that I thought was kind of cool. He said, Jesus makes him happy. Does he make you both happy too?
Yeah.
Yeah.
God and Jesus.
God and Jesus.
And
okay.
a sunny day.
And a sunny day. All right. So yeah. So I think it's important for us to remember that even though we can have friends and stuff and sunny days, it's really Jesus who gives us our happiness, not all the stuff around us, right? And that's what we're going to talk about today in our message is how can we find the joy in Christ rather than so much the joy in things. To start this new series, Things That Jesus Never Said. I'm glad that the Iliff kids are going to help me out each week, help us out, answer questions. I knew Henry would give us some comic relief. I love little Henry. He's always got something funny to say, and Clara and Maddie, they're so insightful. But I'm excited to start this series because, you know, all too often, if you think about it, I believe sometimes we can put words into Jesus' mouth. I know through the years I've heard people say a lot of things that make me go, is that really, did Jesus really say that? And the first one we're looking at here today is this first one of go and do what makes you happy. We hear that a lot today in our culture and everything that's going on around us, that hey, we should go out and do the things that make us happy. I've even heard people say, Jesus says that we should just go out and do whatever makes you happy. And I think we do spend a lot of time thinking about what Jesus said, but in this series, I'm hoping that we take some time thinking about these. We're going to talk about three things that Jesus would never ever say. And as we look at this, you know, I want you to remember this. You know, Jesus didn't just go out into all the world and say, hey, just preach and tell people whatever makes them happy. He never said that. He didn't say that. He didn't say, whoever wants to be my disciple, they must affirm themselves and take up wait a minute, let me rephrase it. He never said, avoid the cross and follow me. He never said that either, right? He said, take up your cross and follow me. Did Jesus ever say, go out and follow your heart? Jesus never said that either. And Jesus never said this. He said, ask and it will be given only to you. All right? He never said that because God, well, he's your celestial sugar daddy. He's just going to give you whatever you want. That's exactly what he said, right? He said that somewhere. Well, of course he never said that. He never said, hey, God is your cosmic vending machine. There's a guy that I heard one time say, Jesus never thought of himself as Jacuzzi Jesus. You know, where you just sit back and you're comfortable and you just enjoy life and Jesus never said that. You know what? God does want us to be happy, but I think many times that we try to find happiness in the ways and in the things that are not holy. God calls us to be holy, and through that holiness, I really do believe that we can find happiness, and that's what we're going to look at here today as we start this series. So we're going to be in John chapter 8. You can join with me on the screens. You could use your Bible app or use a printed Bible, but I'll be using the screen behind me and we'll go through this together, all right? So let's go ahead and read through John chapter 8. Here's what it says. But Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. And at dawn he appeared again in the temple courts, where all the people gathered around him, and he sat down to teach them. And the teachers of the law and the Pharisees, they brought in a woman who was caught in adultery, and what did they do? They made her stand before the group. Now think about these. These men were so focused, these Pharisees, they were so focused on the things of the outside. They had seen what this woman had done, but they didn't really care about her. And so think of this. They bring this woman out in the middle of her adultery. They bring her out in front of the whole crowd to see it. This had to have been the lowest and most humiliating moment of her life. And then they said to Jesus, Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. Okay? Caught in the act of adultery. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now, what do you say? Now, and then in verse 6 it says, they were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing him. Now think of this. They didn't care about this woman. They were using this woman as a way to trap Jesus. And in some ways, when you look at this, Jesus kind of does seem to be in a catch-22, doesn't he? Because on the one hand, he wants to uphold the holiness of God and the commands of God, but on the other hand, the truth of God, but on the other hand, he's also about grace. So what would he do? Would he deny the law of Moses, or would he deny the power of grace? See, the Pharisees thought that they had him. They thought that they had him, but look what it says next. It says, but Jesus bent down, and he started to write on the ground with his fingers. Okay, so he started writing things. You know, one of the biggest questions I've always had when I read this story is, what did he write? Like, what did he write in that moment? We don't know for sure. It doesn't tell us what he wrote, but I think we can infer maybe some things that might have been written. I think we could look at this and see that there were probably some things that the Pharisees didn't want to see. I think we can agree with that. You know, it's interesting, if you break down some of the Greek here in the original language, what you could find here is when Jesus wrote things, it actually means to write against. Okay? So when he's writing against. This probably means that he was writing the sins that they were committing. So just as they had brought this woman out into the public to put her sins on parade for all the world to see, he decided, you know what, I'm going to write them down and for them all to see as well. Now, can you imagine, I thought about it, could you imagine some of the surprise that they had when he wrote down some of these sins that they thought maybe only they knew about? I'm sure there was a lot of surprise. They thought that no one might, of course, I know back in this time, you didn't have the internet, but you know, let's think of some sins maybe they saw, bring it into the context of it today. Maybe some of these sins were written down. One of them was that they were like, oh my goodness, I didn't know that Jesus knew what was on my browser history on the internet. Ooh, right? Or I didn't know that he took that he knew that I took that thing from the synagogue that time. See, these were some of the things that they saw, and so they were being challenged with their own sins. And then in the next verse, it says, but when they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and he said to them, let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her. So literally, he was saying not just without sin, but anybody who has never wanted to sin. I think that's something maybe we've not seen in this passage before when we dig deeper into it. Jesus isn't saying you're just people who have sinned, but he's asking them, he's saying, is there anybody here who has ever not desired to sin? Now, I think all of us in here, and those of us online, we've all run into sin that it just kind of happens, right? But I would also say that all of us in here today have plotted and schemed to sin. And that's what Jesus is asking them. He's saying, okay, you guys think that you're holy. You think you got it all together. And yeah, we sin, and some things we kind of fall into them. Maybe in the spur of the moment we commit a sin. But he's saying, I bet that each and every one of you in this circle, just like this woman, have plotted and schemed to sin. And of course they had. And of course we had. Now in verse 8, it says this. It says, so again, what did he do? He stooped down and wrote on the ground. So evidently some of these guys, it wasn't enough. So he started writing some more. Okay? And then in verse 9, and at this, those who heard began to go away one at a time. So maybe as each person's sin was written down, right, another person left. He's like, ooh, I don't want to stay here any further because he might say some more things I don't want anyone to know about. And so they all started going. And I think it's interesting. It says the older ones first. So the older ones knew that the gig was up. All right? And I know sometimes when you're younger, I think younger people sometimes have more of a struggle with being arrogant with themselves, where they don't realize that they're wrong, okay? And so that's evidently what's happening here. And then it says as the older ones first, and then it got younger and younger until only Jesus was left with the woman still standing there. And then in verse 10, Jesus straightened up and he asked her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" All right? "And no one, sir," she said. And then Jesus said, "Then neither do I condemn you," Jesus declared. "Go now and live a life of happiness." Go do what you want. That's what he says, right? Go do what makes you happy now. You're not condemned. Go do what makes you happy. Well, of course that's not what he says, right? He says, go now and leave your life of sin. You know, while we see here what Jesus says, notice he doesn't say, "Then neither do I condemn you now and go makes you happy," right? He didn't say to follow your heart and do what makes you feel good, or do whatever you want as long as, this is one we hear a lot today, do whatever you want as long as it doesn't hurt anyone. We hear that one a lot too, don't we? What did he say? He said, go and leave your life of sin. You know, what Jesus did here was something that I think just blew the socks off the Pharisees and blows our socks off even here today. You know, what Jesus said here was not condemning, but actually, if you look deeper, it was encouraging, wasn't it? He was telling this woman to go and live a better life. Don't live in shame anymore. Don't be afraid that somebody's going to find out what you're doing. But instead, live for what is higher. Live for what is good. Don't live for the lower things of this world. Don't be held hostage anymore by the sins in your life, by the lies, but walk in the truth. You see how encouraging that is? And yet so many of us, and so many people we know, and so many in our culture today, believe that going out and living and doing what makes you happy, that's the right thing. But what I've seen so many times is those who go after their happiness often find themselves even more unhappy. So I guess we have to ask ourselves the question, what do we do? What do we do that so often leads to us giving in to temptation? Because let's just be frank, okay? Let's just be honest. Sin often looks appealing, doesn't it? Sin often looks like a lot of fun. Okay, I'm going to ask you guys a question. Now, I want you to be totally honest, okay? Remember, we're at church, okay? I want you to be totally honest with me. Raise your hand if you think sin looks fun sometimes. Come on, all right. It does. It looks kind of fun sometimes, doesn't it? Sometimes it looks kind of fun. And I know some of you, maybe you didn't want to raise your hand because those of you in the room, you're in a church building, you're afraid maybe lightning might strike you if you answer yes to that. But no, I mean, all of us have seen sin, and sometimes it looks kind of fun. But here's the thing, and I think this is so important for us today. Sin promises satisfaction at the cost of disobedience to God and eventual pain to you. You know, what looks good at first really ends up biting us, doesn't it? It comes back and finds us. There's a scripture that tells us that. It says, your sin will find you. Eventually it finds us out. You know, it might be, if you're a child, it might seem easier to be dishonest to your parents or your teacher at first, but then eventually it finds itself out. You know, I watched just a couple of days ago, I was watching, any of you ever seen the Diary of a Wimpy Kid movies? You ever watched any of those? You might not have ever heard of them. I know I'm 43 years old, and I know that's kind of weird to watch Diary of a Wimpy Kid, but they're just funny. They remind me a little bit of my childhood and everything. But there's this one situation where this boy, he wants to make his dad happy. So he pretends for most of the summer that he's got a job at a country club. So his dad drops him off every day, and he acts like he's working, and he walks in, but he's actually sneaking in. After his dad pulls off, he sneaks in, and then he hangs out. Well, eventually, his dad finds out, and there's this scene where they're driving back in the car after the whole plot blows up in his face, where his dad says to him, "I'm not angry at you, I'm disappointed. I'm disappointed." And when I saw that, I'm like, how many times has God been disappointed with me? And it's because we so often think that, well, I can get away with this, that this is going to be okay. It's making me even happy. But eventually it finds us out. Sometimes it works for a while, but it always eats at you. I really want to caution all of you today. I really want to caution you, and this is a caution for me too, it's for all of us, is that we live in a culture of relativism. And I don't know if you know what that means, but relativism is the idea that you can make up your own truth, that you can decide what is right for you, that you can do what makes you happy. And then with that relativism, it's mixed in with a lot of narcissism, which narcissism is, well, if you break it down, it's just selfishness, right? It's about me. It's all about me. So when you mix in making up the rules where it's all about me, what are you going to do? You're going to make rules that fit for you, that tell you that it's okay. That we like to make the rules ourselves. And then what do? Then the rules, and this is where it becomes dangerous, then the rules that we make up to us become the truth. It's a scary place to be. When you say that you want to do things that just make you happy, you are being narcissistic and you are creating your own truth. Because it's not at all what Jesus said. Because narcissism and relativism, they will always come back to bite you. Now, here's the problem, though, that we run into so often, and that is this, is that so often, so many people think that happiness and holiness are at odds. I mean, think about it. You just said a minute ago that sin sometimes looks fun, doesn't it? So, if we got holiness and we got happiness, they seem to sometimes work against each other. And so we get into this idea that you can only have one or the other. If you're holy, you have to be like a monk. You have to be the perfect person, never make mistakes. And then on the other side, we think, well, happiness, that means you can just go out and do whatever you want and have whatever fun you want or whatever it might be. We think of holiness as living a miserable life. We think of happiness as being something that you can only get by not being right with God. To be holy, it might mean wearing the right clothes or listening to the right music. Even if you hate it, we think that equals holiness. And to be happy means you do whatever you want. But really the problem is not that happiness and holiness are at odds. That's not really the problem. The problem is this, is that we are looking in the wrong place. We are looking for happiness in the wrong place. Max Lucado, he tells this really neat story. He asks the question in one of his books. He says, would a fish ever be happy on the beach? And here's what he says. Now visualize it. He says, you take a fish out of water, you put a fish on the beach, and answer this question. Is the fish on the beach happy? Well, of course the answer is no, right? He's flopping around. He can't breathe. He's dying. So imagine we give the fish some things from this world to help that fish make him feel that he's happy. Maybe we give the fish a big pile of cash. Or maybe or do you think then the fish will be happy? And the answer, of course, is no. So what if instead we throw a party for the fish? We get all the best-looking fish that are out there in the sea to come join him up on the shore. We put them there together and we give them some cool music and they kind of bop it out, right? And they're partying it up all together. Do you think that the fish is now going to be happy as he's flopping around up there on the beach? Well, of course not. The answer is no. See, if you find yourself wondering, why am I not happy? Perhaps it's because you're living for the things of this world. I really appreciated the song that we used to start off today, Count Your Blessings. All too often we don't count our blessings. We count the things that we don't have. You know what? If you are going to live for the things of this world, then you are looking in the wrong place. Maybe, not maybe, you should lower your expectations of this world. I think our expectations are way too high for this world and way too low of heaven. We have all these expectations that the world is going to do this, 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 and this. But how often have you thought of heaven and that heaven is going to be this, 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 and this? I don't know that we do that enough. I think we think too much about what's here and what we're not getting here especially. See, the fact is today is that you were created by God and you were created for God. You were created to live for things that are not of this world. That's why we feel so unhappy, is because we're pursuing after the things that God didn't create us for. We've all been there. See, sin gives us lots of promises, but it never delivers. It says it's going to make us happy. It says it's going to give us this, that, and the other, and it never delivers. It promises satisfaction at the cost of disobedience to God, and what does it mean? It means eventual pain. Now, it may not happen right away, but eventually pain comes our way. And so my point today for us is this, is that we need to lower our expectations of earth, not of heaven. Lower our expectations of earth and not heaven. Because, see, holiness isn't mutually exclusive of happiness. See, no new car or boat or boyfriend or girlfriend or vacation or likes on social media or the amount of money or the right hair or the perfect body or the pair of shoes, none of those things bring happiness and satisfaction. Self-esteem. We look for self-esteem and things that make us happy, but the fact is that those things that make us happy, what happens when they go away? Go after the joy that your heart craves, and that is Jesus himself, because holiness isn't mutually exclusive of happiness. See, serving God, living for God, not for the lower things of this world that we so often chase after, but for the higher things that are eternal, that is the pathway to true happiness in our lives. See, again, lower your expectations of earth and not heaven. Focus on the things that last. Focus on the eternal things. In Psalm 16:11 it says, "You make known to me the path of life. You will fill me with joy in your presence, with eternal pleasures at your right hand." See, notice that the pleasures here that the psalmist writes about are eternal ones that last. The temporal ones, they don't last. They're not the sinful ones that come and they go. See, when Jesus was with the adulterous woman, if you remember there in John 8, he didn't condemn her, but what did he do? He challenged her to go on a different path. He challenged her to find the true life that she had been created for. And here today, some of us, some of you online, some here maybe even in the room, you're running down the wrong path. You're finding pleasure in the things that won't last. And I want you to know today, and I know from my own experience, that happiness is not going to be found there. You're going to keep looking and looking, and when one thing's gone, you're going to try to find something else. You will not find happiness there. You're not going to find happiness in overspending. You're not going to find happiness in the wrong relationships. You're not going to find happiness. I know one thing that I'm working on now, I've shared with you, as I'm trying to work on how I eat. You know, we don't find happiness in food or in things. We find happiness in Christ alone. Because those things that we chase after, they get you in the end. You overspend, what happens? You end up getting bankrupt. You overeat, well, you become unhealthy. You get in the wrong relationships, well, we know where that can lead. They will get you in the end. It might feel good right now. I can tell you, there's a lot of times sitting there eating that ice cream all the time and all those things, it felt real good. But in the end, it gets you. So remember, sin promises satisfaction at the cost of disobedience to God and eventual pain to you. So the question is, how do we find real happiness? How do we find real happiness? Because, Danny, what you're telling me here, a lot of this stuff, this doesn't sound holiness. This doesn't sound too happy. This doesn't sound too fun. So here's my challenge for you today. It's this. Flee from your happy. So whatever you've defined happiness is. I don't know what it could be. It could be a lot of things. Flee from that and instead run to his happiness. Go to his happiness. Because, see, his happiness is one that is filled with goodness and with grace that lasts. See, Jesus will be faithful to you when all these other things that you think will make you happy are long gone. When the money's gone, when the house is gone, when your very life is gone, Jesus is the only one who will be there in the end. He is the one that gives you happiness. You know, the cash, the house, the stuff is not going to deliver, but Jesus always does, and Jesus always will. In 1 Corinthians 10, it says, "No temptation has overtaken you except as what is common to mankind, and God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear, but when you are tempted, he will also provide a way out so that you can endure it." Sometimes temptations come our way and they are overwhelming, and the only way that we can bear them is through the strength of Christ himself. When that temptation comes to find happiness in the things that are outside of Christ, we have to resist them and we have to flee. Resist from our happy. Flee from our happy to his happy, to what is good for him. See, we know that God is so faithful, that God is so good, that when we're tempted to go after fake happiness, he gives us a way out of it. That's how good he is. But we have to look for it. We have to look for it. He gives you his truth. He gives you his love. He puts other people around you to help you resist those temptations. Find those people. Turn to his word. Turn to him in prayer. And you'll be able to resist. You know what? I don't know how many of you, I know here in this, probably not too many of you played video games much as you were younger, but when I was a kid, we played video games, and back then, we had the most amazing graphics for video games. We had the best video games ever, because the video games today, they weren't as holy, they're not as holy today as they were back then, okay? But one of my favorite games was this one right here. This was Asteroid. And you have this really cool thing here. You'd have this little triangle. It was like your spaceship. And you would blow up all these asteroids before they would hit you. And let me tell you, as you can see here on the screen, the graphics were just absolutely amazing. They were just amazing. I know my kids would just be blown away by the amazing look of these graphics. But here's this cool thing that would often happen when you played Asteroid. If you would find yourself in a pinch, okay? Let's say an asteroid was coming your way and it looked like you were about to get hit. You could push this button, and it was called going into hyperspace, okay? So you push the button and you go into hyperspace, and you could get out of the sticky situation. You could get out of the situation with these asteroids around and go on to live another day. You know what? God has done the same for us in Jesus Christ. God has given us opportunity to get out of sticky situations. He provides a way. But we have to flee from our happiness to his happiness. Because every temptation is an invitation to depend on Jesus. Think of it like that. When you are tempted, it's an invitation for you to trust in Jesus more. When the temptation comes to get that fake happiness, turn to Jesus to really find that true happiness. Long for what is good. So I'm asking you, what is tempting you right now? What is in your life that's tempting you now? Maybe it's a relationship that just doesn't feel quite right. You might remember a couple of weeks ago I talked about Jonathan Edwards and how one of the questions he would ask himself in examining himself is, what is something that's not quite right in my life right now? It just doesn't. Maybe it's a relationship that might make you feel happy, but you know is not what God's form of happiness is. Maybe it's an attitude. Do you have an attitude in your life that seems to get back at someone only to feel horrible later? Feels good in the moment when you go off on them, but later on it makes you feel awful that you did? In that moment, in that place, with that person, will you turn to Jesus? Will you say that his happiness is better than mine? Because, see, Jesus' happiness is real. My happiness and my definition of it, it's not. My definition that I've created of happiness will die when I go to the grave. His truth lasts forever. So here's what I would say to you today as I close. Go do what makes you happy. Yeah, go do it. As long as it makes God happy. And when you do that, that's how you find true happiness. It's only in that that you will find happiness that lasts.